Bookaholics, so welcome back to another Spinner Wheel vlog. The Spinner Wheel vlogs are ones that I have been working on throughout 2025, where I use my spinner wheel to help me pick my reads. I have been doing them by theme, because that's something that I find fun. The first one was self-published books, the second was books by Black authors for Blackathon, and this time we're going to go with Pride and Prejudice retellings. Before I get into the wheel, I'll talk through that in a moment. I'm also going to be reading Pride and Prejudice in Space by Alexis Lampley throughout this vlog. This is due to the fact that all of the books that I have on the spinner wheel are all digital. So if a migraine occurs or if I simply feel like reading a physical book, I have this one. So I didn't want to put this in the spinner wheel because I don't want to rig the spinner wheel so that this one definitely comes up. And at the same time, I wanted there to be the possibility of reaching for a physical read at any given moment. This one is, as it says on the tin, Pride and Prejudice, but in space, written by Alexis Lampley, who is the creator of the Nerdy Inc. And this one is an illustrated retelling of Pride and Prejudice, and it's a sci-fi setting. Let me see if I can find some kind of cool illustration going on here. Yep, here we go. It's got illustrations, it's got some mixed media elements, and the like, and I am very, very excited to be getting into this one. And I don't need to know anything else about it, really. I literally picked it up because it's an illustrated, beautiful version of one of my favourite stories, but in space. Pride and Prejudice is literally one of my all-time favourite stories. I absolutely adore reading Pride and Prejudice retellings. It is a whole separate hobby of mine, reading just generally Jane Austen retellings. The most prevalent one, of course, being Pride and Prejudice. So I am going to be hopefully watching some more retellings that are in film as well. I have watched all of the very typical ones. I have watched obviously the 2005 and 1995 Pride and Prejudice adaptations. I have also watched Bridget Jones's Diary, and I have watched Pride, Prejudice and Mistletoe, which was a Hallmark movie, which was literally just like any other Hallmark movie. I've read several stories that are Pride and Prejudice inspired. Now we're going to read some more. So let's get into the actual spinner wheel part. So the way the wheel is set up for this vlog is that we have our three compartments as usual. We have contemporary retellings, which are literally like Bridget Jones's Diary. They are a modern iteration of Pride and Prejudice. We have reimaginings and continuations, so ones that are set in the same time period. So for example, we have ones that are gender bent. We have one where what if Elizabeth had accepted Darcy's first proposal. We have continuations, so ones that are set after the events of Pride and Prejudice but still following the same characters. And then finally we have SFF, so we have either sci-fi or fantasy reimaginings of Pride and Prejudice. The way the actual wheel works is the three that we have that have these like emoji type looking things, they are the fantasy ones. Any of the Bridget Jones related ones, so Team Bridget, Bridget's Diary and the Blue Soup, are for contemporary. And then Vote for Mr. Darcy, It's Tea O'Clock at Pemberley, and It's Regency Not Victorian are all of the middle part. So let's give it a spin and see what we end up with. Team Bridget, that's a contemporary. All right, and the first contemporary that we have, either right, yep, nope, is Written in the Stars by Alexandria Bellflower. Let's go chat about that. For our first spin, we have Written in the Stars by Alexandria Bellflower. This one is a sapphic contemporary retelling of Pride and Prejudice, in which we are following, I think, the Darcy character as opposed to the Elizabeth character. I don't know a huge amount more about it. I did read the synopsis and it seemed like it would be interesting enough. I think that they are set up on a date and it goes terribly, and then it is how they eventually begin to like each other, I think. I'm very excited to see how this one goes. So that will start me off. I have my digital book, my physical book, and some movies to watch. Movies wise, I am going to hopefully watch the 1940s one, the 1980s one, Bride and Prejudice, which is a Bollywood adaptation. And then if I have the time, I will also try and watch Death Comes to Pemberley, I think it's called. I've had an interesting time with the adaptations, so I'm curious to see how I like some more of these. So I'll keep you posted as and when I watch or read something. I figured since it's always iconic to read, I thought for every adaptation that I read, every retelling that I read, I'm going to read out the first line to see if it's altered or not in any way. So for Pride and Prejudice in Space, we have: it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single spacefaring man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. In the meantime, written in the stars' opening line is: there is only so much chafing a girl could handle, and Ellie Jones had reached her limit. I'm here for that as well. I also have a limit of chafing. Hey vlog, it's a little bit later in the day on Sunday, and I thought I would check in because I have made a little bit of progress in both books, and I thought that I would share some initial thoughts on them. So first of all, I have actually gotten to page 26, so chapter 4 of Pride and Prejudice in Space. So we're about to go to the Meryton Ball, and basically this story is identical aside from occasionally changing out things to make them space relevant, and that's about it. So instead of them being like great houses, they're like landing docks for like these really fancy ships. One of the things that I did really like is that we had in the beginning, when it talks about Mr. Bingley and all of his assets, it says that he has a chaise and four, which is a type of carriage, and this one is a chaise dash N4, which I also thought was very cool. So just like all of the modernizations, but other than that, it's pretty much identical to the original. So not a huge amount to report other than that I'm having fun with the adjustments and, you know, getting through the illustrations to make it really immersive. We had a whole section where the conversation between Lizzie and Charlotte that we get in chapter 2 is in like a mixed media format. We've also, as I said, had illustrations. At the beginning, we had a how time zones work thing as well. Very cool. And then for Written in the Stars, I am on page 90, so that's chapter 5. And basically the way that this happens is we have Darcy and Elle who are on a date at the very beginning, and it goes terribly. And then Darcy comes home and her brother is harassing her because he keeps wanting her to have a better work-life balance, and he wants her to start seeing people because he believes that she's not seeing someone because she got hurt in the past. So he's kind of pressuring her, and to get him off her back, she says that she will go, so that she's actually planning on continuing to date this girl that he set her up with, even though it actually went terribly, because she thinks, oh well, he won't check in on it, he'll leave me be. And you know, because I said, no, we're just testing the waters at the minute, I don't want to keep dating because I kind of like this girl, so we'll see how this goes, and then afterwards you can fix me up if this doesn't work out. So she figures it will buy her some time. In the meantime, Elle is the next morning at breakfast with her mum, and her mum is like, you know, you can't tie anyone down, you can't seem to get into a serious relationship, what's wrong with you, what are you doing with your life? So then when Darcy's brother comes by and is like, hey, I heard you hit it off really well with my sister, Elle's like, first, what the fuck, that was a terrible date, but also great, now my mum is here and she thinks that I've got a potential girlfriend. So she goes around Darcy's house and is like, what the fuck? So they agree to fake date so that they can keep Elle's mum and Darcy's brother off their backs for over the Christmas period. And basically they iron it out that on New Year's Eve is when they can like officially break up. So it means that then throughout the holiday season, Elle can have someone who seems like they're besotted with her and therefore get her family off her back. And Darcy can, you know, go to some functions with this girl so she can see, so her brother can at least see that she's trying. And then the hope is that he won't keep trying to fix her up, that he's seen that she's gotten over her trauma from her past relationship, and therefore she is okay trying on her own and doesn't need him pressuring her. And that's basically where we've gotten to. I've really liked it so far. There have been like the way that they hit it off wrong was literally just because they seem to have really, really different interests. There were circumstances that led to them not really working out. So it's like less that they actively dislike each other. It's not an enemies to lovers. It's just people who don't see any compatibility. So then eventually when they do fall in love, I think it would just be that they come to see what their common ground is and what things they would be willing to put up with in a partner if it was someone that they loved. And I'm looking forward to seeing that. So hopefully it continues to entertain me. I got through those 90 pages really quickly. So it's 90 pages on the Kindle app. So it's probably like 30 pages or something. I don't know. But I am having a good time and I am excited to continue. Hey vlog, it is Monday. It's been a busy day today. I have gotten a lot done. but I have also had a bit of time for reading, so I thought I'd check in. I haven't made any more progress in Pride and Prejudice in Space. That's not one that I'm particularly rushing through. It's not one that I feel I need to sit down and spend a lot of time reading. I don't want to not have a physical read available should the dreaded migraine appear, and also it's not one that I want to be moving around a lot because it's a really nice hardcover. So it's just the one that, you know, at night I'm gonna park myself in the reading room and read a few pages of. If towards the end of the week I haven't finished it, then I'll just kind of finish it off. I'll just sit down and read it for a day on the weekend, which I have more time to do. That being said, I have made some decent progress in Written in the Stars. Written in the Stars is an interesting one because it's not really a Pride and Prejudice retelling. It's a Pride and Prejudice retelling in the sense that it is two people who are quite different coming together, but that's about it, really. You have the slight trope of like overhearing someone talking badly about you and that causing difficulty. But for me, the way it goes down in this one does not a Pride and Prejudice retelling make. I'm going to be that person. I'm going to go very, well, in a Pride and Prejudice, but I'm going to be that person. And well, in a Pride and Prejudice, the scene where Darcy accuses Lizzie of being perfectly tolerable, I dare say, but not handsome enough to tempt me, is a scene in which, if you were to get that scene from Darcy's perspective, this man is fucking done with society. This man has had to put up with so many women over the years foisting their daughters onto him and trying desperately to get him to marry their daughters because he is a wealthy man, regardless of the feelings neither he nor the woman have for one another. He is perpetually hating going to social events. He is an introvert, he is shy, and he does not want to be there. And if you read the book version or if you watch the 1995 version, it's much more, Bingley's he's a lot pushier than in the 2005 movie, which is the one I suspect more of you will have seen. In the 2005 movie, he's just like, you know, oh, her sister's hot as well. You should probably check her out. And he's like, nah, fuck that. In the book and in the 1995 adaptation, it's more like, come on, you look ridiculous. You're not doing anything. You're not joining in. Why are you not doing anything? Go dance with this girl. And he's just like, no, I don't want to do this. Now she overhears it, and like the way that he gets Bingley off his back is like, nah, she's not my type. Perfectly tolerable, I dare say, not handsome enough to tempt me. She ain't my type. I don't want to dance with her. I don't want to dance with any of these women. Thanks a lot. Go away. So the thing is that throughout all of Pride and Prejudice, what you have is two people who are the same, who are encumbered by social prejudice. The society in which they live makes them dislike each other. Darcy assumes that Elizabeth, like the rest of her family, are wanting to be around Darcy and Bingley because they are wealthy men, and it's to push these women onto these men, which is definitely how Lydia, Kitty, and their mother behave. This is not unfounded. It is simply incorrect regarding Jane and Lizzie specifically. Likewise, Lizzie assumes that Darcy thinks he's above everyone else, that he is a snob, that he thinks that he is superior to everyone else in the room. That's not the case. Darcy looks miserable, not because he's surrounded by people who are beneath him, but because he's really sick of the situation that he and Bingley are constantly in, of having women just chucked at them by mothers, regardless of whether the girl is interested, regardless of whether the girl is interested in him instead of his money, or regardless of if he is interested in her. So he don't want to be at this ball, and therefore she assumes that it's because he thinks he's better than everyone else. She is therefore judging him based on society. He likewise is not interested in her because he thinks that she is just after his money, like her mother is. So neither of these things are unfounded. He is rude. She does have a mother who is trying to push her daughters onto these men purely for their wealth. And therefore, it is them having to overcome the initial prejudices that were social bound and eventually become people who enjoy each other's company because they are actually very similar. Now, in this book, these two people are wildly different, to the point where I don't fully understand their compatibility, even if they do have a good sense of humor or a good bit of banter. Very much like in Bridget Jones, Mark and Bridget are not similar people. Mark is someone who is career-driven, someone who has a very different lifestyle to the one that Bridget has, and Bridget is not interested in. Mark and Bridget, their first encounter, are Mark saying, I'm not interested in this woman you're trying to set me up with, because in the few seconds of conversation we have had, she has declared that she smokes, that she parties, and that she has no aspirations. We're not compatible. And Bridget, overhearing him say that, is overhearing him say, the things I dislike about this woman are intrinsically part of this woman. The only thing that is a misunderstanding there is that Bridget is wearing clothes her mother's told her to wear. That's the only thing that is actually them not understanding each other. Everything else, she does like partying. She does like smoking. She does like drinking. She swears a lot. It's who she is. He doesn't like who she is, not a social preconception of her that is erroneous. He dislikes her characteristics. And that's one of the things that was kind of going on with this one as well, is that we have Darcy, who is someone who is very analytical, very organized, someone who likes things neat and tidy, someone who likes everything to have a rational explanation, someone who is very set in her ways, who has a very meticulous life, someone who is very work-centered. And then you have Elle, who is literally someone she believes in astrology. She's someone who's very spiritual. She is someone whose job is not a regular 9 to 5. She's not someone who's very regimented. She is someone who is not very punctual, someone who's okay with being messy. And neither of those are faults. They are perfectly acceptable traits. The book is trying a little bit to pitch them slightly as faults. Neither of them are faults. They are perfectly acceptable ways of life, because there's no right way of living. They're just not compatible with each other. Someone who is very punctual is eventually going to get very frustrated with having a partner who is not. Someone who is very tidy is going to get frustrated with a partner who is not. Someone who is very spiritual, who believes in astrology, who cares about the connection that has to human empathy, is going to get frustrated with someone who constantly looks down on it. They're not compatible as people, at least at the moment. So the amount of personal growth that is going to need to happen is going to determine how much I like this book or not. Because at the minute, the things that they are not compatible in are intrinsic to themselves. It's not just something external and social. We'll see how I like it, because I don't like Pride and Prejudice retellings that kind of lean into they are opposites but they attract, because that's not actually how Pride and Prejudice works. So if this book just continues to be an opposites attract story, I don't know if it was me, because I don't fully believe in opposites attract. I think that there should be enough common ground, which I don't see in these girls yet. So it depends what the common ground looks like, whether or not I find it a believable relationship. But also, even if it is an opposites attract, I'm not going to deem it a Pride and Prejudice retelling. So we'll see how this goes.
Hey, a vlog. We're in the reading room, which means one thing. I have, in fact, finished Written in the Stars. While I still don't think this is really a Pride and Prejudice retelling, it is still a more compatible romance than I had originally given it credit for. So when I was still around the 100-page mark, so a quarter of the way in, I was very concerned that the romance in here would be a opposites attract type of story, where it is just two people who are so disparate in their ethos, in their mannerisms, their way of life, that the whole notion of love will overcome that isn't really applicable in a realistic manner. Now, I appreciate, this is no shade at people who like opposites attract, because we're not reading romance because we want it to be this super realistic version of romance. The whole idea is escapism. No one's reading fantasy because they want it to be an accurate depiction of something. It's just commentary, or it's just fun, or it's just escapism, and that's fine. But I am someone who, when I'm reading a romance, I do need to believe the romance. And I actually think that the author did a really good job of inching both characters towards a middle ground. And the one thing that it does overlap with Pride and Prejudice, outside of just the way that they initially dislike each other, is that we have got the Darcy character needing to make some adjustments to their own life and their own view of their life to be able to accept someone who will bring them joy. And that is something that I did appreciate. So while as a Pride and Prejudice retelling, it is so loose that it's barely there. I do appreciate the story, and it was a good time. So I've given it a solid 3 stars. I had a great time with it. We've got a little bit of spice in there, which I haven't read as much sapphic spice as I would like. So my bias is really happy with reading that. And I had a good time. We did have a phrase in there at one point that was, I might be a single woman of good fortune, but I am not in want of a wife. And it is literally to satirize, so kudos there. One thing that I find very interesting is that going through the reviews, there were lots of people talking about how they felt like it was pulled down a little bit because of the amount of Harry Potter references, which obviously within the queer community is quite a sensitive topic. Now, in my version, and I did afterwards search it in the Kindle app, there is no mention of Harry Potter. And all of the fandom stuff is either soap operas or it is Bewitched and the sort of companion series to Bewitched. So I'm assuming that Harry Potter got taken out, which is awesome. And I don't even need to know what the Harry Potter stuff used to be. I'm so happy that the author took the time to hear the community out, especially within the queer community, and see it was something that was making them uncomfortable unnecessarily, and removed it and changed it. And I really do appreciate that. So that's a thing, and I am really glad that that's a thing. So moving on, we're now going to go spin the wheel again and see what we get. All right, let's spin the wheel. And we got, ooh, SFF. What do we have? We've got, ooh, Spellbound at Pemberley by Abigail Reynolds. All right, so we've got Spellbound at Pemberley. Spellbound at Pemberley is a romantasy. In this one, we are following Fitzwilliam Darcy, who is the most powerful mage in England and on whom the chance of surviving the Napoleonic Wars relies. So basically, it's all down to him as to whether or not Britain can win the Napoleonic Wars. So then he meets Elizabeth, who happens to be a very different kind of mage than he's seen before, and he knows that he needs her help. So the only way he can get her help is by marrying her. And she doesn't want to marry him because it means that she would have to separate her magic from Longbourn, where she's tethered her magic. And that's not something she wants to do. However, dragons have now entered the fray, and England's survival hangs in the balance. And therefore, Elizabeth must now make the ultimate sacrifice and go marry Darcy so that she can save England. I'm very excited for this one. I think it sounds very whimsical fantasy meets epic fantasy meets Regency romance, which sounds like a great combo. So I'm going to go start that one. And when I have some thoughts on either that one or if I read any more of Pride and Prejudice in Space, I will let you know. Hey vlog, it is still Tuesday, but I thought I would check in because I've made some decent progress with all of my reads. So I have made some more progress in Pride and Prejudice in Space. I am now on page 118, and I am now at the point where they are going into Meryton with Mr. Collins. And it's been very interesting because obviously very little has actually changed with the original story. The forms of communication have changed slightly. So for example, instead of letters, you have messages. Sometimes you have Lizzie's diary, etc. And you also have then just changes of settings. So for example, there's a bit at the Meryton ball where Bingley is trying to encourage Darcy to dance, and he says, I can't have you just standing around in the corner. And Darcy's like, it's a dome, there's no corners. So things like that are just kind of, change up the setting and the dress of the story a little bit, but other than that it's not really changing much. So it's just rereading a story that I like, but with a slightly different veneer on it, which is always very exciting. I am really enjoying the illustrations. It's been so much fun just flicking through them, and I am glad to have purchased this edition. The art style and the choice of colours is absolutely my favourite. Yeah, I'm having a good time with it, working my way through it slowly so I don't run out of physical reads, because otherwise then I'm in a pickle. As for Spellbound at Pemberley, I am now on chapter 9. Actually, let's go check the percentage because I can't remember. It's not very far. 23% of the way in to Spellbound at Pemberley. This is an interesting one because this one isn't trying to be a direct Pride and Prejudice retelling. It's just inserted itself into a specific scene and then it's changing the narrative. So basically it starts out, it doesn't explicitly tell you, but it starts out, you kind of later discover, at the point where Jane Bennet is unwell at Netherfield, and Lizzie is staying there to care for her sister, and then her and Darcy have kind of gotten to know each other. She has a slightly more pleasant interaction with Darcy than she has in obviously the original story. And then he finds out that, so basically in this world, mages or people who have a certain magic cannot come within a certain distance of one another without it hurting them, and therefore like breeding magical people is a little bit more complicated. So it turns out that occasionally there are couples who are both magical, but they can get it on, really. They can get together. Darcy has found that he is in such a match with Lizzie. Lizzie is very deeply tethered to the magic of her home. So she is very resistant to ever leave home, and it benefits her family to have her home. It doesn't really seem to make much sense to the Bennets to allow Lizzie to marry Darcy. But Darcy wants to marry Lizzie because he needs her help with defeating Napoleon, because the way it works is because they can tether their magic to each other, but his magic is tethered to his home, he could plonk Lizzie in Pemberley, and if she's pregnant, he can draw from her magic that she can draw from Pemberley, which will enhance his magic. And that could save all of England. So eventually, like, basically the powers that be kind of get involved and like, now she needs to marry him. So I've gotten to the point where she has only a few days until they are to be married. I suspect in the next chapter they're going to get married, and then we'll see it unfold in a yay magic. I am really liking Darcy as a character. He is much more end of the book Darcy than he was at this point in the original novel. So in the original novel, at the point where Jane is unwell at Netherfield, he definitely hasn't had the mirror held up to his face about his behavior and the way he behaves in public and the way he's behaved with Elizabeth yet, because she hasn't confronted him about it. So he is behaving differently to how Darcy behaves in the original book at this point in the book, but he isn't behaving out of character for Darcy in general, because Darcy becomes very much like the character he is being later on in the book. So it's just kind of changed it up a little bit, but not in a way that I think unrecognizable much. Lizzie is a little bit more outspoken. It's obviously a lot more subtle in the original novel, but I think that due to the fact that she does have this power and she didn't expect to really need to marry because her power is benefiting her family, I think that she potentially has been given a bit even more freedom than she was given in the original novel, and that is why this is shocking in a way, that she's actually being forced into marriage. So yeah, it's a very interesting approach to it, I suppose. So I hope that I will continue to enjoy this one. I am going to go get my eyebrows waxed tomorrow, but my mum's getting her hair cut and we're going together, so I suspect I'm going to have a chance to just sit and read, which will be nice. So I'll take my Kindle with me and hopefully I can get quite a bit done. But yeah, that's it for this update. So hopefully things continue to progress in such a good manner. I'm having a good time with all my reads. Yay, I haven't had to DNF anything, and hopefully it continues that way. Hey vlog, it is Wednesday, so I thought I would check in. I've just gotten back from having my eyebrows done and now I need to go get to work. But I thought I'd check in because while I was sitting, because I went to go get my eyebrows done, but my mum got her hair cut. So I had plenty of time to just sit there. And I am now over halfway through Spellbound at Pemberley. It's, so far it's going well. It's an interesting story. It's definitely gotten more fantastical, more in the historical fantasy end of romantasy, which is interesting. We've got a lot of conversations around the magic system, around how the magic works. We're developing how the magic works, which is really cool. And we're also, in a way, talking a little bit about colonialism, about exposure to new cultures, about British prejudice within that as well, like the different cultures that we would deem acceptable or not acceptable to learn from when it comes to the magic. Lots of very cool things. We have Lizzie, who is quite a well-rounded person. She, for example, interacts with a Arabic family, the Hadids, in her area, which is nice. I like seeing different types of inclusion in my fantasy, so hopefully that will persist.
But yeah, it's been an interesting ride. I've had a good time and I am excited to continue. The writing style is very clunky, very, you can tell this hasn't gone through a very rigorous editing process. But I'm still enjoying it anyway and I'm liking the style of it. So to be continued. I am gonna go get into some Jimmy Jams now because I don't need to leave the house again and I can get all comfy because when I'm on my menses, all I want to be is comfy. So I'm gonna go do that. I do need to get out of this jumper because I got mocha latte on it, which is fabulous. I'm gonna go get into some jammers and then I'm gonna go work, and in the background I'm gonna have Bride and Prejudice on, which is the Bollywood Pride and Prejudice. So hopefully it won't prove to be too distracting. Again, the story is nothing new, so hopefully it will allow me to work and watch. If not, I'll get some work done and then watch the film. Either or, we'll see how I end up feeling. So I thought I would jump in. It is Wednesday night and I have just finished Bride and Prejudice. And I genuinely think that movie-wise, this is my favorite Pride and Prejudice retelling that I have watched. It's a musical. Like, you can't go wrong with a musical. The dance numbers are off the charts because like West Side Story, like you get with loads of Bollywood, it's like massive ensemble, super choreographed dances that look so good. And then on top of that, it's like a really faithful adaptation. As much as like a modernization can, it really did keep the core of Pride and Prejudice, and I really love the discussions around prejudice, around the idea of othering people from a different nationality, a different culture, the way the Western world looks on non-European based cultures is so important in that conversation, and it really plays into Pride and Prejudice in a really good way because obviously the social divide in Pride and Prejudice being such a quintessential part and it being literally social criticism, bringing that into the modern day was really good. The way that that then framed Lalita, who is the Lizzie character, in a light that was very much someone who has something to say and someone who has beliefs that change Darcy's mind was really good. Also, one of the better Wickhams, because one of the things for me with Wickham, for example, in the 2005 one, there is something about him that is like, he's not warm, he's not fun, you know, he's a bit mopey, and that's about it. You have to listen to his words to believe him. The 1995 one, like, he's really charismatic and like you buy into it. And Lizzie's a smart woman. Like, you need to buy into it for you to be able to believe she can buy into it. And for me, that was the thing with this Wickham, is he seems nice, he seems like fun, and you can understand why Lolita likes him. And that's also really important. So it stuck to a load of really important key parts of the original and modernized it and put in some banging music. So do you know what? I had a flipping brilliant time with this one. Also, random aside, it's got Rory Gilmore in it as Georgiana Darcy. Fabulous. Anyway, so there's that. I had a great time and I have no reading updates for you, but I'm gonna go read now and I'll update you tomorrow. But yeah, I had a great time with it and I thought I should let you know. Hey vlog, it's Thursday, so I thought I would check in. I am now done with Spellbound of Hemley. This one was a fascinating one to me because I really did like the cottage core, almost witchy vibe that we had to it while still having this Regency setting. Darcy's such an interesting character in here because he is someone who is incredibly respectful, but at the same time someone who is very much in love. Therefore, the way that he is tackling between wanting to push for more and to get Elizabeth to let him in, and at the same time someone who is rightfully very respectful of her needs and her wants, it made for such a
lovely slow burn, because I really appreciate stories that don't equate lust with love. Like, they are very clearly attracted to each other, and the lust part is there, especially in this time period where they need to reproduce, and especially it's quintessential to this story that they have a child. So the romance between the two is interesting because you have these two people who are attracted to each other, but due to circumstances have a hesitation to fall in love with each other. And I really do appreciate that. So we also have some interesting family dynamics, and yet the witchy vibes are completely rocking my world. I really am glad to have read this. It's not like a new favorite. There were definitely some flaws there that I found interesting. There were definitely some bits in there, like the writing style really wasn't always my jam. Like, there would be definitely parts that I think it could do with an editor. Realistically, I think that some of it, there was some interesting grammar choices in there. Some of the choices to make it sound like Regency didn't work for me either. I don't know if this author is American, because American colloquialisms at that time were different to British ones. So I don't know if that's where it's coming from, but there was some interesting grammatical choices in there that really were not working for me. But the story was so good, and the atmosphere and the setting was so good that I was willing to overlook it. So, flawed book, but well executed, and I am glad to have read it. I did also make some progress in Pride and Prejudice in Space, and I'm quite a ways in now. I'm on chapter 37, which is page 264, and we've just had Darcy's letter to Elizabeth justifying himself against her accusations, so not long after his first proposal, at I think just past the halfway point, if I'm not mistaken. Obviously, this is where things actually start to like amp up, and I'm very excited to see how the small like detail changes kind of continue to persist throughout this, because it's literally just that. It is just the setting, the dress of it, the outfitting that it has. It's wearing a space suit, not a Regency dress. Well, actually no, because they have got like bolts, so they do actually wear somewhat Regency style dresses. There was a design in here for the Meriton Ball, I think it was. So they're like Regency but spacey at the same time, which I am here for. But I'm really loving like the extra bits that we get. We get Darcy's letter as a letter, which is very cool. And yeah, like just all the little extra bits that just really bring it to life, and it makes me so happy. And it means that I don't have to reread the Jane Austen one, which I normally do whenever I do a Jane Austen vlog. I reread Pride and Prejudice, but this one being identical aside from like changes of setting or like a couple of words here or there, means that this is just scratching that itch. It also means that then when I'm reading the retellings, I've got that like frame of reference, so that's fun as well. Over the weekend, I might try watching Death Comes to Pemberley, like watch an episode a day. But in the meantime, I don't know if it's 3 episodes or 4. Let's go check. You are my phone, which is my primary Googling device, so have to on here 3 episodes. Fantastic. So yeah, I could do 1 a day, and then I think I'm gonna try watching the 1940s one today, maybe, hopefully. So yeah, hopefully I've still got some more stuff to do. However, I have finished Spellbound at 8, so that means that we need to go and spin again. So let's go do that. Let's go spin. All right, spin time. Ooh, we've got a reimagining or sequel. What have we got? The Other Bennett Sister by Janice Hadlow. Okay, let's go chat about this one. So we have The Other Bennett Sister. I think this one is following Mary Bennett, if I'm not mistaken. I've got a couple. I've got one that follows Mary and one that follows Kitty. I think this one follows Mary. Mary, the bookish, ugly duckling of Pride and Prejudice's 5 Bennett sisters, emerges from the shadows and transforms into a desired woman with choices of her own. What if Mary Bennett's life took a different path from that laid out for her in Pride and Prejudice? What if the frustrated intellectual of the Bennett family, the marginalized middle daughter, the plain girl who takes refuge in her books, eventually found fulfillment, enjoyed by her prettier, more confident sisters? This is the plot of The Other Bennett Sister, a debut novel with exactly the affection and authority to satisfy Austen fans. Ultimately, Mary's journey is like that taken by every Austen heroine. She learns that she can only expect joy when she has accepted who she really is. She must throw off false expectations and wrong ideas that have combined to obscure her true nature and prevent her from what
makes her happy. Only when she undergoes this evolution does she have the chance of finding fulfillment. Only then does she have the clarity to recognize her partner when he presents himself. And only at that moment is she genuinely worthy of love. Out of everything I have read by Jane Austen, her treatment of Mary Bennet is probably the thing that most disappoints me. I think that Mary Bennet is someone who is kind of thrown under the bus for being an intellectual, almost not having social graces. I am always excited to see how people remedy that almost. So I am very excited to give this a go, and yeah, hopefully also watch the 1940s movie. I am in so much pain today. I'm having such a horrible menses day. I feel absolutely awful. Like, I'm on the brink of crying level awful. I've taken lots of meds to try and help with that. Got a coffee. Husband bought me a muffin because that's what love looks like, and I need to get a little bit of work done, but the electricity is being finicky, so I'm gonna have to do it on my tablet instead of on my computer. We'll see how I go about it, but at the minute I'm just in pain and I've got some work to do. So I'm gonna go hopefully read a little bit more of this, start the other Bennet sister, and I will check back in later. Hey vlog, so I've gotten a little bit of work done and I have finished watching the 1940s Pride and Prejudice, and this is actually my first time watching it. I'm interested in it. It's pseudo set in London, but in my head I definitely changed it to being set in the same time period but in America. I think I mentioned it actually in Spellbound in Pemberley that obviously the cultural divide would have been quite different between America and England, and obviously with them having the transatlantic accent of the time period, it was in my head I just set it in America, and it's, you know, the same story but just in an American setting instead, which was fine. I enjoyed it. Darcy and Elizabeth's relationship actually evolves in a less linear way. It doesn't go from dislike to like. It's like she quite likes him, and then she hears Wickham's story and then dislikes him and then likes him. So there is a nicer foundation for it. Also, at no point does she go to his house, so it's not like she, you know, there's never that conception of like she sees his huge house and suddenly she's a lot more interested in the dude. I liked it. Lady Catherine I think that she was an interesting character, especially because they did make her actually like Lizzie instead, which was cool. So there were some interesting things going on in there, but for the most part it's very similar. And yeah, I had a good time. Obviously it's 1940s, so it's super overacted. The blaring music that you get in between dialogue is hilarious, but yeah, it was a good time. So I figured I'd check in there. I have also received, so I've bought myself some, the transparent, they don't look transparent when they're like that, but they are transparent. They're transparent sticky notes so that I can annotate some books. Mostly it's because I don't like my handwriting, so I don't like annotating books, but I don't mind doing it on sticky notes. And I figured the transparent ones, even though they smudge, and I know they do because I've got the sticky tabs that I have are all the same like material and they smudge, but I would rather the transparent ones instead of the ordinary ones. So we'll see how this works out. But I haven't started the other Bennet sister yet. I'm probably going to do that now. I'm going to go have some lunch and read the other Bennet sister. Yeah, just plod along with work all day. It's literally going to be like a whole day ordeal. I am assuming that since my two eldest kids, which are the ones that get homework, are on a school trip, they're not going to have homework today, and I will be able to continue to just sit here in bed and work and die. That's my only update. I just kind of wanted to check in and talk about the film a little bit, just because it is fascinating to me a little bit. The time period in which it was written versus the time period in which that was filmed. I don't know, I like stuff like that. So hopefully I'll continue to enjoy them. The next one that I have, so I was going to watch the 1980s one, which is actually a series and it's 5 episodes. So I might leave that for another time. In which case, I have found, guys, I have found a 2003 movie, and it's Mormon. It's from like a Mormon production company, and I'm so curious. Do I want to watch this film? No, but do I want to watch this film? Yes. You know? No shade at anyone's face. It's just that like deeply religious movies always fascinate me. It's like an anthropology study, you know, from a completely separate culture to my own, and I am very, very curious. So yeah, I'm gonna go watch Mormon Prejudice at some point, probably tomorrow. Try and squeeze that one in. And then yeah, I'll watch Death Comes to Pemberley hopefully over the weekend. That will be my watching. So yeah, let's see how this goes and see if I can get my hands on the 2003 one and watch it. We'll see. Hey vlog, it is Friday. It's a very exciting day for me today. I am feeling a bit better now. No migraine, and the cramps have definitely lessened. They're still there, but they're not completely debilitating. I have been working this morning, but I thought I'd check in because I did get some reading done, and I did also get some reading done last night. So first things first, Pride and Prejudice in Space. I have made a huge amount of progress. I am now on chapter 46, which is when Elizabeth is heading back to Lambton after having been at Pemberley, and the embarrassment that she feels after being kind of seen by Darcy visiting. So we are very close to the end now. I hope to finish this. I'm trying to eke it out so it lasts until Sunday. But I know there are just certain bits that's like I need to get to. Once I'm reading, I'm like, okay, I need to get to this part. So I really needed to get to that encounter between Darcy and Lizzie. So I was very excited to see that. This one, obviously we've got like a bit more space travel going on because they're going from different planets. Obviously what I'm mostly here for is the art. We have like a whole bit here literally just talking about the nature of the place, and we've got even like Lizzie's notes on what she's been seeing, which was very cool. And then we have her actually in Pemberley, which as I showed you before is looking very beautiful. So yeah, I'm having such a great time just having like the extra materials, the extra stuff in here so that I can continue to see this world in a different manner, and it's really fun. And I don't have a huge amount to say because it's all my same thoughts on Pride and Prejudice. Like the plot's not changing, it's the exact same book, but I'm having a great time, which is what I always say when I'm reading this. I have also gotten to chapter 8 of The Other Bennet Sister. Again, because it's on Kindle, I have no idea what actual page that is on, but I'm only 9% in. So I suspect this is going to be a kind of long book. I'm hoping to get some more reading now. I am absolutely starving, so I need to go and have some lunch, and I will read with my lunch. I'm really, really liking the writing style. I feel like Janice Hadlow's done a fantastic job of capturing the Austen-esque nature of this time period and of this story, which I think is really cool. I am really liking getting the perspective of Mary, because at the minute we're still in Pride and Prejudice. We're still in the parts that are Pride and Prejudice. So the first thing that we have is that we're about to go to the Meryton Ball. So we saw kind of like as a child the way that Mary felt about her sisters. So they were all very close when they were really little, and then they just got to a point where their mother kept praising Jane, because Jane and Lydia are their mother's favorites. So you have their mother repeatedly praising how amazing Jane and eventually Lydia are. Then you have their mother still being relatively pleased with both Lizzie and Kitty, and then obviously also their father's adoration of Lizzie. And all throughout this, the way that Mary is not only overlooked but oftentimes put down, how she's not pretty, how they're worried about her prospects, how untalented she is, uncharismatic she is. She doesn't feel like she has anything in this society to compensate for what she is lacking in. She's not pretty, and she's not charming, and she's not demure and modest like Jane. There is very little to recommend her in this society, because while she is quite an intellectual, she loves reading, that isn't necessarily something that was heavily promoted in women at the time. You have a lot of the mother wondering why she needs to read so much, denying her a governess because none of the others have needed one. Why should she? She's not spending that much money just for one of her daughters. We had the part where Mary gets her glasses and how disapproving her mother was, but how lovely the optician and his son are. And there were just lots of things that I've really liked. We also see her relationship relationship with Mrs. Hill. Mrs. Hill is mentioned throughout Pride and Prejudice. She is the housekeeper in Longbourn. We have where Mary has the closest relationship with Mrs. Hill. That's not mentioned in Pride and Prejudice, but it wouldn't have been necessary. She's a cursory mention. The person within the household that Mary is closest to is Mrs. Hill. It doesn't necessarily compute because you're only seeing Mary's interactions with Mrs. Hill, because Mary's the only one that has a room to herself. So Lydia and Kitty share a room, and Jane and Lizzie share a room, and Mary has her own room. The way that we see it is that you're only seeing the interactions between Mary and Mrs. Hill, so it could be wrong, but I get the feeling that Mary is Mrs. Hill's favorite, which is really nice because you see so much of the depiction of how lonely Mary feels, that Mary feels like a complete outsider in her family. Everyone else is paired off and everyone is someone's favorite something apart from Mary. We see how she slowly falls out of kind of favor with Lizzie and Jane. They were all super, super close when they were little, and then Mary feeling essentially depressed about her state, about the way people see her and perceive her, the jealousy she felt for her sisters and how excluded she began to feel of her own accord, not because Jane and Lizzie were excluding her, but because she felt so other to them. We have this depiction of Mary as a outsider because of depression, which is such an important thing to talk about, because a lot of the time depressed people aren't actually actively excluded. It's just that they stop being actively included, and it amounts to the same thing. Like Lizzie and Jane didn't just suddenly be like, no, Mary, we don't want to be around you anymore. Mary started to withdraw and Lizzie and Jane did nothing to stop it. And that's not necessarily that Lizzie and Jane are in the wrong, they're just not in the right. And I think that was a really important depiction and a really interesting way for the author to go about not throwing any of the existing characters under the bus, while at the same time still allowing for Mary's feelings of isolation to be completely valid. Because what we have seen of Jane and Lizzie, it is uncharacteristic for them to actively push aside their sister. They wouldn't just suddenly be like, do you know what, we don't want to be around you anymore. So it's how that broke apart in a really devastating but organic way, I think was handled really well. So there have been lots of things already in here that are definitely noteworthy. I am excited to see how this continues. There are definitely scenes in Pride and Prejudice that I'm very excited to get Mary's perspective of, namely her interactions with Mr. Collins, because some people kind of feel like if Mrs. Bennet had pushed Mary onto Mr. Collins instead of Lizzie, that she would have married him. So I'm very excited, and I think the 2005 movie kind of leaned into that. So there's the moment when Lizzie rejects Mr. Collins and he storms out and walks right past Mary, and Mary's just kind of looking at him. So it's kind of hinted in that as well. So I'm very excited to see what this author, who is trying to give Mary more autonomy and more sense of self, I'm wondering how she's going to depict that scene. Also, obviously, all of the scenes where like her sisters are like off gallivanting around the country and it's just her and Kitty at home, and how those interactions go. So I hope we get a decent amount of Pride and Prejudice in here, and then we also continue past that for Mary's story. So I'm hoping to find a really good balance of it, and I think that this author is really capable of that. I'm not so fussed about the romance, so if that just kind of comes in at the end because it's like Mary flipping deserves one, then that will be fine by me. But obviously if we get a slow burn one, then all the better. Lots to say already, and I'm only 9% in. So hopefully I will continue to have lots to say, and I will check in either later or tomorrow. Maybe not later, because I am going to go watch Cabaret today. My local theatre, which is literally like basically almost rural. It's like a town near the coastal town. And we have a theatre there. It's very small. I've only ever been to see pantos there. And now it's going to host Cabaret. So I'm very excited to see how I'm going to feel about this, especially because like it's still rural Spain, you know, rural Catholic country, and we're showing Cabaret, which is pretty awesome. And it's sold out. So like Velez is wanting culture. Velez Malaga is here for culture right now, and I'm here for it. So hopefully it's going to be loads of fun. I'm going to go watch that with my parents, and then we're going to go out for a bite to eat. So I don't know if I'll check in today. If not, it'll be tomorrow. Good morning vlog. It is now Saturday, so I thought I would check in. I had a great time watching Cabaret last night. It was lots of fun. I really did appreciate it for a borderline amateur performance. It was a really good one and very fascism critical, which is like the point of Cabaret anyway. So I really liked that, and the discussions around, the way the Weimar Republic was versus the rise of Nazism, blah, blah, blah. I thought that was really good. The performances were top tier, and yeah, I had a great time. So I figured I'd check in this morning. Last night I did get to manage to finish part 1 of The Other Bennet Sister. And that means that now we have finished Pride and Prejudice. So the actual Pride and Prejudice part of this story is now all wrapped up. Lizzie's married off, Jane's married off, etc. And we have now jumped into part 2, which I've read this morning. Part 2 has so far been a very interesting one because this one is following mostly Mary after the demise of her father. So 2 years after the end of Pride and Prejudice, Kitty has married off. Kitty married a clergyman who lives near the Darcys, and now it's just Mary, and then their father has passed away, and their mother basically now spending most of her time between Jane and Lizzie's houses, occasional visits to her other daughters, and Mary is the only one that is unwed. Mary did spend a decent chunk of time at Jane's house, but was suffering a lot at the hands of Caroline Bingley, who obviously was very disappointed with Darcy's marrying Elizabeth, can't take it out on Elizabeth, so has decided that she's going to take it out on Mary. So Mary decides instead to go stay with Lizzie, and while she's with Lizzie, she sees how close Lizzie is with Georgiana Darcy, and that kind of makes her feel odd because she feels like her sister loves Georgiana Darcy more than she ever loved her, and that obviously then creates a whole different thing of emotions for Mary. And then after that we move on to her going and staying with the Collinses, which is since they have now moved into Longbourn because the father has passed away, and she's staying with Charlotte, and we have established an interesting kinship that she has with Charlotte over the first part. Now this is where my thoughts and feelings on this book stray a little bit. I really did like the Pride and Prejudice element of the first part. I did think that it was a really interesting discussion, and I especially think that I really liked getting the perspective of Mary when it comes to how she perceives the rest of her family. It's definitely done as a way where it's how Mary perceives them instead of just this is who they are kind of thing. It is all from her mindset, which I think is important to note. But with this part with the Collinses, so we had within the Pride and Prejudice end of things in part 1, we did have it where Mary presented herself as a potential candidate for Mr. Collins's affections, and the mother tells her no, that she's going to push Lizzie instead. Then obviously when that goes badly, the mum is like, oh, actually no, I'm going to push Mary, and it's too late, and then Mr. Collins goes and marries Charlotte. Once she's staying with the Collins, she actually spends time with Mr. Collins, and he is suddenly enraptured with wanting to teach her and wanting to talk to her about books and things that he never did when he came to visit her when they were both single. And it's kind of I wonder if I hadn't been so hasty, if I'd have married you, if we'd have loved each other kind of thing. And I really didn't like that. I really didn't like this element of it, because as much as it's trying to redeem Mr. Collins, which I think is admirable, Mr. Collins was not the kind of man who would have wanted to converse with Mary. It's completely changing the character, and it's the first time we've seen this. So then having Charlotte be slightly jealous of Mary and Mr. Collins's friendship. I mean, I understand Charlotte, especially in that time period, but again, not characteristic. The whole thing was just unnecessarily messy, and I genuinely don't think it added anything. That entire part was not necessary. She could have gone and stayed with the Collinses and then had a chat with Charlotte about things and been like, no, I don't want this kind of life where we kind of just make do with each other. I want something else, and moved on with her life. It did not need to be as long as it was, and it did not need to be as messy as it was, and it did not need to throw Charlotte under the bus like that, especially Charlotte. I didn't like that part at all. So I'm feeling a bit bitter about this book now. So we'll see how I feel when we go into the next part, because I really don't like when the development of women comes at the expense of other women. We shouldn't be developing Mary by throwing Charlotte under the bus. Hopefully this next part will be better. At the minute, it's gone from this has 5-star potential to Oh, this has 2-star potential. So we'll see where the next part goes and how I end up feeling about it. I haven't made any progress with Pride and Prejudice in Space. Shocking no one. So I'm probably going to read that tonight once I finish this. I'm not doing anything today. I'm chilling all day. So I'm going to continue to read The Other Bennet Sister. And then tonight I will read Pride and Prejudice in Space. And then hopefully tomorrow I can dedicate the day to reading an entire book. That would be really nice. So hopefully I can finish this today so I can spin one more time. Good morning vlog. It is Sunday, so I thought I would check in. I was going to check in yesterday, but I ended up spending way longer reading The Other Bennet Sister than I thought I would. And at this point I had issues, and I think that I felt like I needed to finish the book to be able to fully discuss those issues with the book. So I didn't check back in, and then by the time I'd finished it was really late and I couldn't be bothered, not gonna lie. So here we are now, but I'm gonna first quickly mention that I yesterday did manage to finish Pride and Prejudice in Space. I really didn't have very much left, so I managed to whiz through this. This was such a wonderful experience because, as I keep saying, it is exactly the same book. It's just that it has different setting, which is more to my, general taste. It's more my vibe because it's sci-fi, so that was a fun addition. And then on top of that, we had the wonderful, beautiful illustrations going throughout this as well that made this an all the more immersive experience. So I had a wonderful time. If you're a fan of Pride and Prejudice and you'd love to have like a slightly different take on it or a slightly different setting for it, and then on top of that you want it to be really immersive and illustrated and mixed media, this was a great time. I don't know what to give it rating wise, because I basically, like, writing wise, I'm just rating Jane Austen all over again. So it's like not so on core part, one of the sections is writing. I don't know exactly what to rate it on writing because the author didn't really do any, so it's a weird one. I feel like it's 5 stars because Jane Austen's writing is 5 stars, and then the additions and the illustrations have also made for it another 5-star experience, but in a weird way. It's a really weird 5 stars. As to The Other Bennet Sister, this is where I have issues. So The Other Bennet Sister is written in 5 parts. So we have part 1, which is the Pride and Prejudice retelling. Part 1 was a 5-star read, almost. Like, it was a really good time. It had a couple of things that were a little bit annoying, but I really enjoyed getting the Mary Bennet perspective of Pride and Prejudice. You definitely see a whole different angle to Pride and Prejudice, which I thought was really interesting. Part 2 is when, after their father has passed away, Mary is figuring her way in the world. So she's stayed with Jane, she stayed with Lizzie, and then she goes and stays with the Collinses. That part 1 was boring. 2 was superfluous. It was not actually necessary at all to the plot. I can tell you, having now read the whole book, it was not necessary. 3 was a complete character assassination of all 3 characters involved and deliberately throwing Charlotte, Lucas / Collins under the bus. It was very much like, we're going to vilify the only other overlooked girl in the entirety of Pride and Prejudice for Mary's sake. And worse yet, mostly for the improvement of Mr. Collins. That to me was not good. And the whole section ceased to feel like a Pride and Prejudice book and like a really boring, watered down version of like a historical drama. Think Brontes, think Tess of the D'Urbervilles, where you've just got this poor, unfortunate soul trying to muddle her way through life. It kind of had that section, and like everyone's kind of messy and the relationship's kind of messy, but like in a boring way. Like, not in like this melodramatic, really toxic, people are going to make horrific decisions. Just like if you took all of the drama out and you just had people being petty instead, that's what that whole section felt like. And I was bored and angry throughout that whole section. And that section is like 2-star at best, maybe 1 star. Then part 3 is London. And part 3 is similar to the beginning of Northanger Abbey, where you have her going and staying with some wealthier relatives and they kind of give her a makeover. They go shopping, they buy her dresses, and almost like the beginning of a lot of rom-coms where, like she's gone from not really caring about her appearance or feeling strange about wearing nice clothes because she's always told she's ugly, to getting dressed up and wearing clothes and wearing her hair in a way that actually suits her and is more flattering to her, so she's no longer this ugly duckling. Because she's no longer under her mother's thumb, she's got a little bit more freedom to do so. That part was fine. It was nice to see the gardeners again. I found the gardeners had changed a little bit from Pride and Prejudice, but it didn't bother me. It's how
she goes about socializing and interacting with people. Then we have part 4, which is when they go up to the Lake District. So it's Mr. and Mrs. Gardner, Mary, and their friend. They all go up to the Lake District, everything's going well. And then this other guy that in part 3 has also been flirting with Mary also comes up, and then we get loads of drama, and it becomes like proper, just melodramatic romance drama. And to the point where we once again have everything that we have established until this point of Mary makes no sense. It literally makes no sense the way that she acts. And literally, like, at the end in part 5, where, you know, we're trying to deal with the resolution of everything, you literally have Mary being like, I don't know why I acted that way. So out of character for me. I don't know. It just didn't work. And then part 5 is her mum comes back down to London and is trying to meddle. It's not a good book. So going over my issues with it as a Pride and Prejudice fan, trying to do this in the sense of, because this is aimed at Pride and Prejudice fans, I feel. One, obviously the character assassinations are obvious, very obvious. It's kind of annoying how obvious it is that she's just taken the name of a character and shoehorned it into her story. There were several occasions where I genuinely wish she'd just chosen a character that we don't know, like made her own character, because the character she was making was so far removed from the one that we know from Pride and Prejudice. As someone who has read it, I think at least 10 times now. No. 2. My impression going into this, and if you read the synopsis, I feel like it definitely leads you on to believe that this book is going to be, if not completely feminist, at least let's shine a spotlight on the forgotten women kind of story. It's not, it's just about Mary. Every other woman is up for grabs to be thrown under the bus. At this point, we still have the perpetuation of Caroline Bingley being the mean girl that literally only wants to ruin other people's lives with no further depth or nuance to her. We have Charlotte Lucas being completely thrown under the bus at the expense of improving a man, in this case Mr. Collins. We have no further mentions of Kitty. We don't actually see the entire year that just Kitty and Mary lived together, because that wouldn't suit the narrative, because the chances are Kitty and Mary would have at least slightly grown closer as the remaining 2 Bennet sisters. So we're going to completely skip that entire year that she spent doing so that we can continue to perpetuate this poor Mary, she's excluded from all her sisters narrative, even though Kitty wasn't much more, because she literally was just kind of following Lydia around. So many girls, so many women that could have had a much more prominent role and could have been improved were instead either cast aside in the case of Kitty or completely thrown under the bus in the case of Charlotte and Caroline. So they were just issue upon issue. And then on top of that, in the latter parts, the parts that were not just the author taking the existing Pride and Prejudice text and reframing it like we do in the first part, in all of the other parts, we had references back to Pride and Prejudice, even though we'd already basically reread Pride and Prejudice in part 1, like a summarized version. So you get at one point Mrs. Bennet once again saying a single man of good fortune must be in want of a wife, but like just at Mary way later on. And then we have Lizzie reading a book that basically parallels her own life and giggling at it and finding it ridiculous before the events of Pride and Prejudice actually happen, and just so many things like that it was just so heavy-handed with, look, this is Pride and Prejudice, while at the same time clearly not actually caring enough about Pride and Prejudice to do the characters justice. But that's just me. So I did not have a good time with this book. It was shaping up to be like a book I was really going to enjoy and had so much potential to be a book I would really like, and it just completely blew it as soon as the author was left to her own devices, in my opinion. Now, granted, some of this will be because I'm very precious of Pride and Prejudice, because it is one of my favourite books, but part of it is also just, I am A-okay with you improving the narrative for Mary. I have said before that I think that I feel quite disappointed about the treatment of Mary throughout Pride and Prejudice, but I don't think that we should improve Mary at the expense of other women. At the expense of men, sure, especially in this time period. At the expense of women, no thank you. So, I have nothing else to do today, so I'm going to spin, and we're going to see what book I get, and we'll go from there.
We're here now, and I have Mr. Darcy's Dragons by Maria Grace. This one I know very little about, other than that it's a fantasy retelling of Pride and Prejudice. I think with this one, because I literally only picked it up because it's a fantasy retelling of Pride and Prejudice. It says Dragons and it says Mr. Darcy in the same title. Like, that was enough for me. So I think I'll start reading it, and once I kind of get the gist of like what exactly this is as a Pride and Prejudice retelling, I will let you know. We'll see how I fare. 'Tis later. Reading has been done. I am now about, what are percentages? About 30-ish% of the way into Mr. Darcy's Dragons. Okay, so first of all, writing style, because that's the first thing you see. It's alright. It's not bad. It's immersive. I'm having a decent time. Nothing to write home about, but it's a good time. The character work so far has also been very good. Like, it just feels very faithful to the original. I am really liking the way that the world building is going in here. So we're in a fantasy setup, but it's in our world. So we've had Darcy, who is a dragon keeper. So there was a war between dragons and humans. We're at peace now. Darcy's dragon keeper. So dragon keepers are amongst a few people who can hear dragons talk. They have to have like super sensitive hearing, which means that they can actually hear dragons talk. And Darcy is one of those, and he is taking care of a dragon egg, and it gets stolen and taken to Hertfordshire, and he now has gone to Hertfordshire to go and find this dragon egg. And then he runs into Elizabeth, who thinks very little of him because like he lost a dragon egg, he's quite rude, but she is also a dragon keeper and she can hear the dragons, and she's got a very intense bond with the dragons that is very interesting to Darcy, and it kind of goes from there. So now they kind of need to work together to go find this egg, but then also at the same time she kind of doesn't trust him with the egg because he's already lost it once. And overall it's become very interesting because obviously the strife between them once again is not actually based on their disliking of each other's personalities so much as the circumstances under which they meet each other, which is very similar to Pride and Prejudice. So far, so good. I am having a good time with it. I hope that I will continue to enjoy it. As I said, the setup's quite interesting. The way that the family structures are is very much like, you know, dependent on this fantasy setup and the way that dragons work, etc. You do get a downloadable appendix thing that you can get that's like a guide to the types of dragons, etc., which is very cool. So I flicked through that. I haven't read it thoroughly, but I flicked through and that was interesting. It's got some art in there as well. That was fun. I'm having a good time. I'm liking the way the story's going. I'm hoping that I continue to enjoy it. That's basically where I'm at the moment. Now, I have been feeling weird about my rating of the other Bennett sister because I gave, I think, Spellbound and Pemberley, I think I ended up giving that 3 stars. And maybe also Written in the Stars. And I feel comfortable with those ratings, and I definitely liked the other Bennett sister less. So I think I'm going to actually end up bumping it down to 2 stars, which is really bad. I'm going to see how I feel about this one. If this one's also like a solid 3-star, I will definitely bump that down. If not, potentially I could bump the other 2 up to 4, but they don't quite... Written in the Stars could go either way. It might even already be a 4. Spellbound at Pemberley feels like a 3 because of the writing style. It needed an editor, but I loved the story, so that could get bumped up. So it depends on this one. If this one also comfortably feels like a 3-star, I'm lowering down the other Bennett sister. If this one ends up being like a 4-star, then I will bump up Written in Stars if need be. I don't know if I've given that one 3 or 4. And Spellbound at Pemberley, I'll bump up to 4. So we're going to see at the end of this vlog how my ratings have actually fallen, because they're subject to this book, which is weird because the books shouldn't be contingent on one another. But in this case, I kind of need to iron out my thoughts a bit more than I usually would, so we'll see how I go. Hey vlog, I am gonna go get cozy and in bed and hopefully try and finish up this book, but I am now 80% of the way through Mr. Darcy's Dragons, so I thought I would check in. I am enjoying this book. It's a fun ride. It's an interesting take on the story of Pride and Prejudice because it kind of diverges a lot more than the others that I've been reading while still holding really true to the characters. I really like the way that the dragons are incorporated in here. They feel like it's an interesting discussion around the imposition of humans on these dragons. I don't know if that's deliberate or not. It's a long
series, so I'm assuming there are going to be lots of conversations around the way that dragons and humans interact in this world, which is great. So I'm just having a good time with this one. It's not a particularly brainy one. It's not one that I need to think about a lot. It's not one that I'm going to talk for 15 to 20 minutes about like some of the other ones, but it's a good time. And that's kind of, I think, what I needed from this one. After how the last one went down, I really did just need for this one to be a fun time and to enjoy my experience reading it, and that's what I'm getting. I haven't watched Death Comes to Pemberley in the end. I just didn't get around to it. I might tomorrow while I'm working try and squeeze in the 2003 Pride and Prejudice retelling. We'll see if I have time before I finish up this vlog and check in, but that would be fun, I suppose. But none of the series were watched, which is weird because normally I'm more of a series girl than a movies girl nowadays, but oh well. Hopefully tomorrow I will check in at some point, wrap up this book, wrap up this vlog, and maybe have also watched this movie that I suspect I'm going to despise. Hey vlog, checking in to wrap this vlog up. I am done with Mr. Darcy's Dragons, and I also did watch the 2003 Pride and Prejudice movie. So let's chat about those and then I'll wrap up everything. Mr. Darcy's Dragons first, we'll get to that first. I had a good time with this one. It was a lot more brainless than the other fantasy ones that I read this week. So Spellbound at Pemberley definitely felt a lot more like I wanted to concentrate on them more, I suppose. This one was a lot more just fun, I guess. It definitely feels like the kind of book that I understand why it's such a long series, like that is going to be serialized. That worked well. I'm not in a rush to continue, but I would consider continuing. I had a decent time. The characters felt very truthful to the original characters they're based on. The dragons and the dragon element was absolutely fascinating, and then the way that that altered the world, the way that that incorporated a different dynamic to the familial system and therefore gave Lizzie a little bit more sway as well. So overall, a good time. I definitely think that one of the issues I have been having with pretty much all of the self-pub ones is because they try and weave in the actual Jane Austen-ness to it, to the text, it sometimes then falls short. So you have things that are very clearly immediately imitating Jane Austen, but then you have other bits that just don't hold up to the same standard, and it is quite jarring and it makes it more pronounced. So while the writing styles are not inherently bad, there are just things in there that are quite glaringly like, oh, that's a bit jarring. And then on top of that, a couple of these really could have done with an editor, and they definitely also could have done with potentially a bit more proofreading. Like there are grammatical errors in some of these. So it's a good time and I really enjoyed them, but they're not like new favorite material. They were fun, and I am glad that I read this one. Now we're gonna talk about the 2003 movie. So this one is supposed to be loosely based on what's the church called? The Latter-day Saint culture. It's a branch of Mormonism, and it's supposed to be very loosely inspired by that because of the kind of convergence of both Regency era and modern day Latter-day Saint culture when it comes to their approach to marriage. So it's very much like chastity until you're married, you're supposed to marry young, etc. So we're following Lizzie, who wants to be a writer, and she's at uni, and she is so instead of them being her sisters, they're her college roommates. And while she is there, she meets Darcy, who they have like a not great first encounter where they think very poorly of each other, and then everything else kind of follows suit. You have Wickham is her romantic interest, like he's interested in her and wants to marry her. Mr. Collins is just a dude who's at the uni who also wants to marry her, and everything else kind of plays out rather similarly. Obviously, the emphasis on marrying young in 2003 with an opening like, my mum thinks that there is a time in life in which women should be getting married and that I'm way past it, and this protagonist is 26. And I'm saying this as someone who got married at 19. I don't feel like you should feel like you need to be married
ever, but especially not 26. It's a weird one. I don't know how I feel about that. The acting was Disney Channel acting level, so there's a level of melodrama to it, which is fine because it's a romance, so it doesn't not suit it, but it's got that level of melodrama and overacting that you get like Disney Channel. And the side characters, especially, they're all very much like trying to embody something. I didn't despise it like I thought I would, but it was a lot. And again, the acting not great, and everything's a bit overacted and overwritten, and then the messaging in it was just abysmal. I didn't hate it any more than I kind of expected. I knew what it was going in, and it lived up to those expectations, and it wasn't quite as bad as I thought it would be, and that's the best I can say about it. But I did make myself a little list of all of the adaptations, the Pride and Prejudice adaptations that I know of, that I can find like on Wikipedia, and then I have ticked off which ones I've watched. So I can now go tick off the 2003 one, which means now I have read 10. I've watched 10 of these adaptations, and I have 10 to go. So I am 50% of the way through now that I've ticked that off. So that's very good. I'm very excited. So let's wrap up the vlog. I'll wrap up what I've watched just because it's here. So I watched the 1940 Pride and Prejudice, which felt very 1940s, a very classic Hollywood, transatlantic accent, all of the facial expressions and all of the OTT-ness that comes with that transitional period between silent movie into voiced motion pictures, and you can see that they've still got all of that facial expression stuff going on that was still lingering from the silent movie era, which I thought was fantastic. Had a great time with it. I think that the relationship between Darcy and Elizabeth especially was a very interesting one and really well handled. I then watched Bride and Prejudice, which to date is my favorite contemporary retelling of Pride and Prejudice out of all of the ones that I have watched. It was a fantastic conversation starter around the treatment of white people in Asian countries and the way that we perceive the world, on top of it being a great Pride and Prejudice retelling. So I had a wonderful time with that one. And then I watched the 2003 Latter Day Pride and Prejudice. I didn't hate it as much as I thought I would, but I didn't like it. That's the best I can say. As for books, first of all, we'll start with Pride and Prejudice in Space, which I've ended up giving 5 stars. Word for word retelling, aside from the adjustments to make it space-centric and beautifully illustrated, so it could do no wrong, and I am super, super glad that I own this, and I love it. We have Written in the Stars, contemporary, very, very, very loose Pride and Prejudice retelling. I don't really think of it too much as a Pride and Prejudice retelling. It's more just like, it's got nods to it, and that was fine. I enjoyed it for what it was. As the Pride and Prejudice retelling, not the best. As a romance story, it was a decent time. Gave it 3 stars. Was fun. Was sapphic. Then we have Spellbound at Pemberley, which was a fantasy retelling. In this one, I had a really good time with the fantasy elements. I think the fantasy part was done really, really well. And I did also really find that I was immersed in it. And I love the relationship that we have between Lizzie and Darcy and the way that that blooms. I love the amount of autonomy that Lizzie originally had and the way that her relationship with Darcy is impacted by that. And then the actual, as I said, the fantastical elements were really cool. The interpersonal relationships were lots of fun, and I had a great time. But it did have some prose issues and some grammar issues that it could have done with an editor, and there was definitely a little bit in the middle there that did kind of knock the pacing about a bit. But other than that, I had a really good time, and that one also got 3 stars. Then we have The Other Bennet Sister, which started out super stellar, started out with the Pride and Prejudice retelling part of Mary Bennet's life as a 5-star, and then as soon as we dropped Pride and Prejudice and we went into just Mary Bennet's part of the story, it really lost me and it ended up being a 2-star read, and I have lowered it to 2 stars. And then we have Mr. Darcy's Dragons, which is another fantasy retelling. I really love the world building in here. It was a fun time. It was definitely more in the fun zone for me, and I really liked the way that this story was paced and plotted. I do again have issues with some of the editing, and it could have definitely done with a better editor, but I had a great time with it as well. And it also gets 3 stars. So for the most part, a relatively decent vlog, especially because it's just mostly retellings that I'm just kind of getting either for free or for 70p online. So I had a great time. But that is all for this vlog. It's a very long one, so I hope you'll bear with me. But thank you ever so much for watching, and I will hopefully catch you in another one soon. Bye!